Hampshire, one of the most respected members of Congress, and he is none other than Congressman Ron Paul, Republican of Texas, candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. And Congressman, it's great to have you back with us here on the Lou Dobbs Show.
Thank you, Lou. Good to be with you.
You are, I watch you struggle occasionally in your appearances you are such a patient man. That's what I will say. We are dealing with so many critically important issues. And I want to turn first and foremost to foreign policy right now, because you have been as straightforward as anyone in the public arena about Iran. And I'd like to begin there, if I may, by asking for your view on what we should be doing, what should be the U.S. policy toward Iran and the Middle East.
Well, I think we should take the advice of the founders, and they were pretty explicit. They advised us to stay out of the internal affairs of other nations and not get involved in entangling alliances, and I think we've been doing a lot of that, and we've gotten ourselves into a lot of problems. I look to the Constitution for guidance, and there's nothing that says that we should be doing what we're doing overseas, but there is strong instructions there to provide a strong national defense. I think when we get overly involved overseas, it actually weakens our national defense and exposes us on national security. And right now, of course, the world is very much aware now of the sovereign debt crisis worldwide as well as domestically in our states. So these all come together. I think we spend too much money. We do things we shouldn't be doing. I think we should have a much more non-interventionist foreign policy, and we should work on less sanctions and more trade with people. And I look to how we handled things during the Cold War. I was in the military for 5 years in the 60s. We had to deal with the Soviets and missiles in Cuba and China, and these were monstrous nations that had killed hundreds of millions of people, yet we dealt with them differently than we are with some of the countries in the Middle East, especially Iran. So I don't quite see the necessity of going to war against any of these countries. I don't think it's good for us, and I don't think it's good for world peace.
Would you accept an Iran with nuclear weapons?
Well, people ask me that a lot, and they like to think that, or think that I'm taking a position that I don't care. I do care a lot. I don't want anybody to have more nuclear weapons. I didn't want India to have them. I didn't want Pakistan to have them. I'd like to see a lot less in our country. I didn't want the Soviets to have. So I'd like a lot less of these, so I'm not interested in it. But I understand the issue well enough. I'm not willing to go to war because they're thinking about getting it. I'm sure, even though there's been no proof from our CIA or United Nations that they're actually working on a nuclear weapon, I'm sure they're very serious about hoping they can get one because it's a good bargaining tool. You know, Gaddafi gave up his bargaining tool, and you know what happened to him? He was working on some nuclear bombs and things, and he gave that up. But Pakistan has them, and India has them, China has them, Israel has them, and all around Iran they have nuclear weapons, so it's very natural for them to probably try to get a bargaining chip. But I don't think it's a justification for starting another war. I think it would be very foolish.
And your judgment of this administration's handling of Iran?
Well, we haven't heard as much about that, but it was a continuation of what we've had before, and that is sanctions and tougher sanctions and threats, and I don't think that's what we should be doing. If we could talk to the Soviets, and if Kennedy could make a deal at the height of the Cuban crisis with missiles staring us in the face, I don't know why we can't talk to them. So I would say the continuation of the Bush policy is more or less what Obama has been doing. So things haven't improved, and there's just a lot of rhetoric that I think stirs up trouble. Now, I do understand that they did open some type of a token embassy, at least a remote embassy, and if that's an introduction to more communications with the Iranian government, I would consider that very good.
Turning to those plans that we are looking at in this country on how to, as the super committee goes about its work, cutting $1.2 trillion from the federal budget deficit, we now have a proposal from the Democrats, according to leaks from both parties within the committee. $3.4 million from the Democrats, a proposal that would include tax increases, from the Republicans, $2.2 trillion that would not include increases in either the personal income or corporate tax. Your thoughts on these proposals and your own plan to slash spending by $1 trillion in your first year as president?
Yes, well, I obviously wouldn't support any tax increases, so I can't consider what the Democrats have offered. But I don't get too excited about what the Republicans are offering because they're not real cuts. They're cuts in the proposed increases of the baseline budgeting, which means that there are no cuts next year. And I think the only thing that counts is the current budget. And if we don't cut it, we're not very serious. And that's why my proposal cuts $1 trillion and gets rid of some departments and changes our foreign policy and really cut back, because I really sincerely believe that this sovereign debt crisis is far from over. I don't believe just creating new money out of thin air, whether it's the European Union or whether it's our Federal Reserve through the IMF and other organizations, is going to solve our problem. We have to quit spending the money, so that's why I make this very important suggestion that we do cut the spending. I believe nothing is going to improve our economy until we get control of our budget.
Do you think it's sufficient in this debate among each of you running for the Republican presidential nomination to leave out the discussion of business practices, corporate practices, and their impact on our standard of living, our quality of life in this country? Because it seems there is just, you were talking obviously about fiscal policy and have been an important and often the most important voice on the debate on fiscal policy. But we're hearing almost nothing about the outsourcing of jobs, the loss of manufacturing, and what can be done to rejuvenate them, except in the broadest terms. Right. Reduce regulation, reduce taxes, and magically appear, 20 million jobs. None of us believes it, not even those who are making such proposals, in my opinion. Your thoughts?
Well, I do think you have to change the environment, the tax environment,
right,
and the regulatory environment. But I emphasize, of course, the monetary environment, too, because when a country gets to issue the reserve currency of the world, it's a great temptation to issue money but not productive jobs. So that encourages wealth to go overseas because it's much cheaper for us to buy goods from overseas than it is to produce them, because they keep willing to take our dollars. But corporations get some free rides here. I think it became most obvious when corporations, the big banks, got into trouble. Although these housing programs were designed to make sure the middle class and poor people got houses, actually a lot of people made a lot of money, and the middle class, they eventually lost their jobs.
Right.
The corporations got bailed out. So the whole system is designed to protect those who are within the system, know they're too big to fail, and then there's the lender of last resort, and the Congress comes to the rescue once they say, it's going to be the end of times if we allow anybody to go into bankruptcy. So I think the corporations get a free ride, but we have created an environment which is hostile to our businesses, and therefore we chase our businesses overseas. I think changing the tax code on about repatriating of capital is very important, and would be one step to help bring some of that money back here.
Absolutely. The repatriation of capital, critically important. And the tax treatment of that capital going forward, that is money made by corporations and their subsidiaries overseas, is critically important. But everyone seems to have a flat tax plan that is running for the Republican nomination. Do you think that's just a boffo idea? Should every Republican candidate have a flat tax?
Well, yeah, I want my flat tax
I
rate,
understand.
Down to zero. I want 0, 0, 0. But, I don't talk as much about taxes as others, and my program has some tax adjustments, but most of the emphasis on spending, because my claim is that spending is the tax, because if government spends, they have to either tax us, or they have to either borrow the money, or they have to print the money, and that's all a burden. If the printing spending of the money causes prices to go up, and the poor and the middle class pay those bills in higher prices. So spending is the real culprit. So even in Congress, I haven't been a co-sponsor of a flat tax or a fair tax or anything else. I think that until you get control of the spending, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And they always want the new revenues. I want to change people's attitude of their dependency on government, whether it's all this overseas spending or whether it's the entitlement system that's totally out of control. And then this whole idea that nobody can fail, they're too big to fail, and there's always the entitlement system that nobody can fall through the cracks. That just encourages people to take risk and depend on government, and government's not dependable anymore. That's the big issue that's happening today, is most people realize that our government is broke, they're not dependable, and they know we have a pie that's shrinking. Everybody is fighting over the pie rather than fighting over how do we become more productive, how do we restore the jobs. And we haven't gained any new jobs since the year 2000. We've had 30 million new people. So that's where the problem is. We've destroyed the environment for creating jobs here. Unless we change that, we can't work our way out of this. We're going to get in a much worse shape.
Do you think we've got to start manufacturing? Do you think we've got to bring home the jobs that have been outsourced?
We have to, but it has to be done by changing the environment. I mean, I don't think politicians know what should come back and what shouldn't come back, but we do know that systematically, there was a time, especially back in the old days when I lived in Pittsburgh, we had a steel industry, that's gone, car industries, that's gone. So much in, textiles, all been shipped overseas. And there's something wrong with our environment, and I do believe it has, it's involved with labor costs, too. We don't have free labor costs. And we've seen the Northeast and the Midwest suffer more so than in the South because of the outrageous cost of labor. And then if they can't compete here, they're going to go someplace else, and that's a major problem, too.
Now, when you talk about the outrageous cost of labor, Congressman, you start making me think you want to cut the cost of the pay of a U.S. congressman by 50%. You don't want to do that, do you?
Well, did you see what my proposal says on my presidential salary? It's down to $39,000.
Yeah, but that's sort of if I may say, that's a hypothetical. I'm talking about the real deal. I'm talking about your current.
I'm willing to do that. Matter of fact, I think the median salary for the average American is around $50,000.
Yep.
The average salary for a government is $80,000. I don't think we should ever pay anybody in Washington more than the median salary that the people get. Besides, I want to get rid of those jobs. I want these people to return to the private sector.
Yeah, and my view on this, Congressman, I don't. You may not care, but very quickly, let me just inject it into the ether, and that is that every man and woman working in this country ought to be making a very good wage so that they can buy American-made products and stand tall. Because we've had a lot of people talking fancy about free trade and our knowledge-based economy and our service economy, and yet our economy, since the people who started that talk kind of got in charge, our economy has gone south and sideways and not forward, and I don't think many people are too impressed with being a knowledgeable economy right now.
Yeah. But, I agree with the goal, but I think you have to be careful on how you do it, because if you immediately say that if somebody can get a cheap product from overseas that they're no longer allowed to do that, that immediately raises their cost of living. If they're getting shoes for 50% of what we can make them for, why double the price of a pair of shoes for the poor people if you exclude their ability to buy? So I would like people to have free choices, not only in their personal life, but also in their economic life. I like to see people spend the money the way they want. I see it as a moral issue as much as an economic issue. We shouldn't tell people how to spend their money. Free choice.
That sounds like a good name for a third party.
Are you going to do it?
No, I was going to ask you if I'm definitely not doing it. How about you? Can you rule it out as definitively as I did?
I always said, I have no plans to do that.
Well, now that wasn't as definitive as I was, Congressman. I said I absolutely am not.
I have no intention of doing it.
Congressman, you're a great American and a great Texan. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Lou.
Congressman Ron Paul. He is absolutely terrific, folks. He's third right now in the polls in New Hampshire. I think the more people listen to him, the higher he's going to go in those polls. We're coming right back.